Yellowstone is known for its beauty, wide valleys, calm trails, and clear water. But the same landscape that draws millions each year can become fatal without warning. This episode examines the most terrifying deaths ever recorded inside the park. It was June 17, 2016. In Lamar Valley's thermal runoff zone, the morning felt routine. Light steam drifted off pale ground as cars slowed for wildlife. Phones came up for photos. Nothing seemed urgent, and no one expected an ordinary recording to document a death unfolding too fast to stop. Gina Williams was 28 and worked as a veterinary technician in Idaho Falls. Her job involved assisting with large animals during exams and procedures, watching behavior during restraint, and helping treat injuries that required calm hands. Co-workers described her as confident and careful, someone used to working close to animals when situations felt controlled and predictable. Outside of work, Gina recorded wildlife encounters several mornings each week. Her audience was small but steady, mostly repeat viewers who followed her style. She had informal promotional ties with a phone stabilizer brand and a small outdoor clothing company that occasionally reshared her clips. Views usually increased when she stood closer than the park guidance advised. That morning, she pulled into a roadside turnout to record a bull bison near a mineral-crusted thermal runoff pool fed by nearby hot springs. The ground looked firm in spots, but thinned toward the edge, where heat and steam kept it damp. Wind shifted in short bursts, pushing steam low. The bull grazed several yards away, lifting its head as it closed the distance. Later review of the phone recording showed a clear change in the bull's behavior. The animal shifted from grazing to a broadside stance and stepped several feet closer before stopping. Its head lowered slightly, and it scraped the ground once with a forehoof, breaking loose dirt and mineral crust. The runoff pool sat directly behind her, its edge uneven and thin, with hot water flowing just beneath the surface. The bull moved abruptly. Its first contact came as a forceful shove driven by its shoulder and head, not a full charge. The impact struck Gina across the hip and upper leg, lifting her briefly and pushing her sideways. She fell hard onto uneven ground, several feet from where she had been standing. As she tried to regain her footing, the bull pivoted and advanced again. The second contact came moments later. Its head and chest struck her squarely, pushing her backward toward the runoff pool. The mineral crust beneath her heels fractured as her weight shifted, offering no support. The ground collapsed without resistance, and Gina fell backward into the runoff pool, entering legs first as steam erupted from water near 200 degrees Fahrenheit. The bull stepped forward once, then turned away and moved off, leaving only boiling water and rising vapor that quickly obscured the pool from view. What followed allowed no chance for rescue. Contact with the water caused immediate and catastrophic thermal injury, with heat severe enough to destroy skin and underlying tissue within seconds. The unstable ground and steam made it unsafe for anyone nearby to approach. Emergency services were contacted immediately by witnesses familiar with the area. Rangers arrived within minutes, but could not enter the runoff zone due to extreme temperatures and the risk of further collapse. The phone was later recovered from mineral crust near the pool after water flow shifted, confirming the sequence of impacts and the timing of the fall. The coroner ruled the death an extensive thermal injury, with full-thickness burns over more than 90% of the body. Superheated water and steam caused rapid organ failure, and consciousness would have lasted only seconds, with death occurring in under half a minute. Injuries matched sudden immersion after a single blunt force impact, consistent with witness accounts and site conditions. In the weeks that followed, her promotional partners quietly withdrew. Park officials installed additional fencing around the runoff area and revised safety briefings to address how animal movement, unstable ground, and recording behavior can combine without warning. A single shove was enough to keep Gina from recovering. Once her footing failed, gravity and heat took over. In the next case, gravity wouldn't wait below, it would open outward. It was August 3, 2017. The lower falls rim was quiet under steady wind, mist lifting from the river far below. Tourists leaned along the railings, unaware that beyond the boundary, a lone figure was preparing a jump that would end before the morning crowd fully arrived on the rim. One of the visitors that morning was Jake Peters, 19 years old. Jake grew up in Billings, Montana, the son of a warehouse supervisor and a night shift nurse. With his parents working opposite schedules, he learned early how to manage his own time. Parkour became his structure. He trained alone behind strip malls, drainage canals, and bridge abutments, repeating movements until they became consistent and controlled. Online, he posted short clips that emphasized precision over flash. His channel generated modest income. Small sponsors provided shoes, grip tape, and camera mounts, expecting regular uploads rather than caution. Jake tracked performance metrics closely, noting which videos gained traction. School felt slow and disconnected from measurable results, while movement offered clear feedback. Success reinforced the idea that preparation could reduce risk, even in unfamiliar environments. The Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone presents conditions that are difficult to judge without specific experience. Basalt near the falls remains damp from constant spray. Lichen forms thin, pale patches that appear dry but reduce friction sharply under pressure. Wind moves unevenly along the rim, shifting direction without warning. These factors combine to create surfaces that look stable while offering little traction. On the morning of August 3rd, Jake crossed posted barriers before sunrise. He recorded setup footage as he walked, explaining the jump and positioning equipment. Wind gusts exceeded 20 miles per hour but remained steady. Rangers had issued advisories warning of slick conditions near the rim. The signs were visible, but Jake continued past them. He selected a narrow stone outcrop overlooking the canyon. There was no harness, no spotter, and no safety line. Tourists nearby watched from behind railings, assuming the situation was controlled. Jake rehearsed the jump twice, stepping closer to the edge each time. Moisture darkened the stone beneath his shoes, though nothing appeared to shift or crack. Shortly before the attempt, he posted a short clip establishing the jump and confirming it was underway. Responses appeared quickly, mixing concern with encouragement. Jake positioned himself several steps back from the edge. Wind noise increased briefly, then settled. He moved forward into the run. His push-off came slightly late. His lead foot contacted a stone coated with mist and lichen. The loss of traction was immediate. Momentum carried his body sideways, and balance could not be recovered. There was no stumble or hesitation. The edge dropped away beneath him as he passed it. Witnesses reported seeing him clear the rim fully before disappearing. The fall lasted several seconds. He struck a lower ledge shoulder first, then continued downward. The final impact occurred near the river, out of direct view, but the sound traveled upward clearly. Afterward, only wind and water were audible. Emergency services were contacted immediately. Rangers reached the rim within minutes and assessed the scene from above. There were no signs of movement. Due to terrain and safety concerns, recovery teams descended later that day. The body showed catastrophic injuries, with extensive skeletal damage and dislocation consistent with a high-velocity fall. The coroner listed the cause of death as catastrophic blunt force trauma. The skull had fragmented on impact, and internal organs were destroyed simultaneously. Death would have occurred instantly. There were no indications that medical intervention could have changed the outcome. The initial recordings were secured as evidence and later restricted. Copies circulated briefly before removal. Jake's channel went inactive. The incident was incorporated into park safety briefings as an example of how terrain, weather, and momentum leave no margin for correction once a commitment is made. Jake trusted preparation to carry him through unfamiliar terrain. In most places, that logic works. In Yellowstone, the margin for error doesn't expand with experience. It disappears entirely once motion begins. It was July 22, 2016, near the Firehole River by Old Faithful. Steam drifted across calm-looking water as visitors waited nearby, unaware the current below was stronger than it appeared. Ashley Thompson was 20 years old, a sophomore biology major at a mid-sized Midwestern university. During the school year, she was organized and dependable, known for steady lab work, color-coded planners, and arriving early for group assignments. Friends described her as cautious when expectations were clear and boundaries defined. She was not reckless and rarely took the lead in risky situations. The trip to Yellowstone was meant to be a break from routine. Ashley was traveling with 6 sorority sisters on a post-session road trip, loosely planned and informal. Phones were present, but recording was casual and sporadic, used to capture moments rather than document events. Short clips were taken for private Snapchat stories, shared among friends without expectation of wider attention. Alcohol had been consumed gradually throughout the afternoon. No one appeared heavily impaired, but judgment and coordination were reduced. Ashley was comfortable swimming in pools and slow rivers, but had no experience with geothermal waterways. The Firehole River is shaped by thermal runoff, creating warm surface water over strong, uneven currents. Near Old Faithful, slick volcanic rock, algae, and sudden depth changes make footing unreliable. Warning signs were posted, but the busy area appeared calm and harmless. Near the riverbank, a challenge formed gradually. It began as light encouragement and turned into expectation as a few phones were raised briefly. Ashley stepped into the river fully clothed, wearing shorts, sneakers, and a sweatshirt. One short recording captured her entering the water before the phones were lowered. She moved a few steps forward as the water reached her ankles, then her calves. The current pushed unevenly against her legs, stronger than it appeared from shore. As she shifted her weight, her foot slid on the slick riverbed. She lost balance and slipped into a deeper channel where the river dropped suddenly. Once submerged, the current pulled her downstream and held her below the surface. The force of the water made it difficult to regain footing or break upward consistently. Involuntary breaths drew water into her airway, disrupting any attempt to coordinate movement. Within minutes, oxygen deprivation began to affect strength and coordination, reducing her ability to fight the current. From shore, visibility was poor. Ashley resurfaced briefly once before being pulled under again by the uneven flow. The river carried her just out of reach as the current pressed her downward. After that, she was no longer visible. Emergency services were contacted immediately when it became clear she was not resurfacing. Bystanders entered the water cautiously and searched downstream. Ashley was located and pulled from the river after several minutes of intermittent submersion, followed by a final period underwater. She was unresponsive when removed from the water. Rangers and paramedics arrived shortly after and began resuscitation efforts without delay. Despite continued attempts, Ashley did not regain consciousness and was pronounced dead at the scene. The post-mortem examination listed the cause of death as drowning. Park officials stated that her death resulted from prolonged submersion after she slipped beneath the surface and was held underwater by the current. Prolonged submersion led to fatal oxygen deprivation. There were no signs of assault or external trauma. Investigators reviewed the brief recordings taken before the incident to establish timing and context. The footage showed no indication that the situation was recognized as an emergency before she lost her footing. Environmental factors, including river current, slick footing, clothing weight, and reduced coordination, were identified as contributing causes. The incident prompted renewed warnings about entering geothermal rivers. Yellowstone officials later incorporated the case into river safety briefings, emphasizing how quickly seemingly calm water can become unsurvivable once footing is lost. More Yellowstone cases are ahead. Consider subscribing if you want to see how ordinary people misjudge environments that don't allow mistakes. It was September 10, 2015, near Tower Falls. A photography workshop gathered along a narrow forest trail as wind moved through standing dead trees under otherwise routine conditions. Robert Stevens, known to most as Bob, was 45 and had spent over a decade photographing decay in protected landscapes. He worked seasonally as a contracted guide, filing permits through the National Park Service and advertising workshops on outdoor photography forums. His income came from modest sponsorships with camera retailers and licensing agreements with conservation magazines that favored stark, unsettling imagery. Bob was quiet and deliberate. He cared more about order than attention, spending his time documenting fallen trees, erosion, and the gradual decay of abandoned natural features. Students described his teaching style as patient and deliberate. He encouraged close positioning for composition and believed careful framing mattered more than distance. He carried 2 DSLR cameras, a carbon fiber tripod, spare batteries, and weather covers. The workshop that morning focused on standing dead trees, especially lodgepole pines weakened by beetle infestation. Bob selected a narrow forest corridor near Tower Falls, where several dead trunks leaned at shallow angles. A wind advisory had been issued overnight. On arrival, conditions appeared stable enough to proceed. The group discussed risk briefly and chose to continue. Before the demonstration began, several participants recorded short clips of Bob explaining composition choices and environmental context. Cameras were lowered once positioning started. The corridor was quiet, except for wind moving through the canopy. Bob stood several feet ahead of the group, adjusting angles and explaining how dead trees illustrated impermanence within protected landscapes. As the morning progressed, wind gusts increased in frequency. Needles and small branches fell intermittently onto the trail. A few students raised concerns and suggested moving to a more open area. Bob paused, looked down the corridor, and decided to continue with a shortened demonstration rather than relocate entirely. He stepped closer to a dead pine to show how proximity changed perspective and scale. The trunk showed surface cracking and a hollowed base, features Bob had previously identified during the walk. Wind noise rose briefly, then dropped. The group remained stationary, listening, with cameras no longer in use. The failure occurred without prolonged warning. A sharp crack cut through the corridor as the dead pine sheared partway up its trunk. The sound drew immediate attention, but there was no time to react. The tree fell diagonally across the narrow trail. Bob was struck across the abdomen and lower chest. The force drove him downward and pinned him to the ground. His body folded forward beneath the weight. Movement stopped immediately. The tree settled with part of the trunk resting across his torso and one shoulder. Emergency services were contacted immediately by workshop participants. Rangers arrived within minutes, followed by medical personnel. Bob showed no signs of consciousness or breathing when responders reached him. Due to the weight and position of the tree, there were no survivable injuries. The area was secured, and the workshop was dismissed. The coroner later described the cause of death in plain terms. The falling tree crushed the chest and abdomen, destroying internal organs and rupturing major blood vessels. Death occurred at the moment of impact. There was no evidence of prolonged suffering or secondary injury. Investigators reviewed footage recorded earlier during the workshop to establish positioning and environmental conditions before the incident. No recording captured the moment of impact. Equipment was examined and found functional. Weather conditions were documented and determined to be within existing advisory thresholds. The death was ruled accidental, caused by gusting wind and proximity to unstable dead trees. Workshop guidelines and permit requirements were later revised. Bob's remaining sessions were canceled, and his unfinished work was archived and restricted to internal safety training. A falling tree feels random. In Yellowstone, it isn't. But some hazards don't announce themselves with sound or movement at all. At Norris Geyser Basin, the danger was already present before anyone stepped off the boardwalk. It was May 28, 2018, at Norris Geyser Basin. Steam drifted low across pale ground as visitors paused on boardwalks, unaware shifting wind could allow dangerous gases to accumulate. Maria Restrepo was 29 and worked as a dental hygienist in Fort Collins. She valued structure, predictable routines, and outcomes she could control. Her job demanded steady hands, attention to detail, and calm focus under pressure. Carlos Restrepo, 31, managed inventory for a regional beverage distributor. He spent his days checking shipments, fixing small errors, and making sure everything ran smoothly. He was quiet, careful, and routine-oriented. Neither of them liked attention. Choosing to elope was simply a way to keep the moment private and uncomplicated. They hired a freelance photographer whose business centered on unconventional outdoor weddings. His portfolio emphasized contrast, couples framed against stark or restricted landscapes that appeared raw and unfiltered. He advertised experience in national parks and promoted continuous recording before ceremonies to capture natural movement rather than posed stillness. The couple agreed to photographs and short video segments, trusting his familiarity with park conditions. The camera recorded as they walked from the parking area toward the boardwalk. Norris Geyser Basin is one of Yellowstone's most unstable thermal areas. Shifting vents release steam and gases through thin ground. Hydrogen sulfide can pool in shallow depressions, displacing oxygen and dulling smell. Warning signs advised visitors to remain on boardwalks, especially during low wind. The photographer guided the couple off the boardwalk into a shallow basin slightly lower than the surrounding surface. He positioned them where steam rose behind their shoulders, leaving their faces unobstructed. Wind slowed noticeably, and steam that had been lifting began to spread outward and flatten. Maria coughed once and brushed the air aside with her hand, then remained in place. The recording ended shortly after positioning was set. Carlos paused when he noticed a faint metallic odor. It was subtle and inconsistent, easy to dismiss. The photographer adjusted his stance and stepped back to widen the angle. Steam thickened near the ground and clung to clothing. The basin remained quiet, with no visible wildlife nearby. Carlos leaned toward Maria, preparing to complete the photographs and step away. As they moved closer together, Maria's knees gave way without warning. Her body stiffened briefly and dropped forward. Carlos collapsed almost immediately afterward, his legs folding beneath him. Both struck the ground within seconds. Their movement stopped shortly after contact. Maria's hands moved briefly against the gravel before becoming still. Carlos's chest rose once and did not rise again. Their eyes remained open and unfocused. The photographer stepped backward instinctively, increasing the distance from the basin. Steam continued to drift low across the area. Hydrogen sulfide continued to pool close to the ground. The photographer retreated uphill toward clearer air. Emergency services were contacted immediately. Park rangers arrived within minutes, followed by medical responders equipped with protective gear. Both Maria and Carlos were unresponsive when reached and showed no signs of breathing. The coroner later explained the cause of death in simple terms. Hydrogen sulfide interferes with the brain's ability to control breathing, causing rapid loss of consciousness. Oxygen deprivation follows quickly. There were no burns, no external injuries, and no evidence of prolonged physical struggle beyond brief muscle reactions at collapse. Autopsies confirmed the findings. There was no trauma to internal organs, the lungs were clear, and blood analysis showed critically low oxygen levels. The time of death was estimated at less than 1 minute after exposure. Medical findings matched the observed sequence of collapse and immobility. The images taken earlier were collected as evidence and later circulated despite attempts to restrict them. Public debate followed regarding responsibility, access, and safety boundaries. The depression where the incident occurred was permanently fenced off. The photographer surrendered his equipment and left the profession. Thank you for watching. If you're ready to see more Last Moments videos, click right here.